So, a debug menu is a sort of program within a game to allow developers to manipulate it from the inside for testing purposes. Using this code, you can enter Mother 3's debug room by changing screens while holding the R button. In the room, there are several characters you can talk to that manipulate different things. The Mr. Saturns in the top left allow you to begin playing the game at the beginning of any chapter, the left one sending you to the chapter's pre-time skip and the right one sending you to the one's post-time skip. The characters to the right of the Mr. Saturn send you to individual chapters, each being represented by a central figure of it, except for Chapter 6. By using the character warps as opposed to the Mr. Saturns, you can jump to specific parts of each chapter. The room contains two Hanawas, with the one in the top row cueing the ending cinematic, and the one in the lower row letting you save. Hanawa was a save frog this whole time. Deep lore. The payphone on the far right determines the sprites Lucas and Kumatori use, the pre-time skip ones being kids and the post-time skip ones being adolescents. The cast text breaks Lucas's arm. It cues the cast. If you do this before naming Duster, Kumatora, and Salsa, it'll fill in their default names, but if it's done before entering a player name, it'll be left blank. The pig mask allows you to toggle which party members are present, and even allows for the temporary ones to be placed in, including Bronson, who isn't a party member in the final game, but more on him later. Using this function also allows you to have up to 5 party members instead of 4, but screws with the menus, though it doesn't seem to be harmful. If you try to enter a chapter with a custom party, however, the game will reset the party to be more appropriate. Unless you were to use a top secret way by saving with a save frog around the point you want to use your customized party, then entering the debug room and die to the firefly in the bottom right of the room, spawning at said frog, and then continuing. But that's just speculation. Alternatively, you can use this code to change the firefly to the natural killer cyborg so you can lose much faster. This information was given to me by GGFan, who has helped out quite a bit with this video, and has done some insane challenge runs of the game using the debug room, and I'd recommend checking them out. He even originated the low-level Salsa solo run, which I did my own playthrough of earlier this year. There's also some other odd problems you may encounter when exiting the debug room, such as being soft-locked when trying to return to the pre-time skip world as the maps will get conflated, or cutscenes not working due to the order of your party. On to the Pigmask Captain, he or she will allow you to set your party's levels by increments of 5, up to level 99 where the party members max out. The Navy Squeal lets you spam your inventory with nuts, which is hilarious. The Pigmask Major lets you view several transitions, and the Pigmask Colonel lets you have every map along with setting all memo flags, another thing we'll revisit later. And those are all the functions of debug mode, but believe it or not, this isn't even the only one. The others have less to them, but we'll cover them briefly. You can load in what I call the Chapter 7 debug room, which you can access a small one outside of Oso Castle. All you have to do to access it is go to the debug room, go to Chapter 7, select Crossroad, go back to the debug room, go to Chapter 2, go to Oso Castle, and use the walkthrough walls cheat code to get up to the spot next to the drawbridge. And there they'll be. There's also a debug room that looks just like the original, but contains the game's bosses. And finally, there are 2 debug menus that, as of this time, seem to be inaccessible, but text for them has been found for what have been dubbed the Outside and Battle debug menus. There's also a funny glitch where you can actually enter the debug room with a pork bean, and bring it to places it shouldn't be. There's a misconception that if you defeat the Firefly, you'll be soft-locked inside the room, but using the payphone will revive him. And for some reason, whenever you leave the room via the character warps, you'll be given your favorite food and a Rope Snake DX, both of which go unused in the final game, yet another thing we'll be discussing later. Alright, now on to the game's hidden content. Before we dive into this section, I'd like to give a huge thank you to the Cutting Room Floor, who I am sourcing much of this information from. While studying the pages on Mother 3 for this video, their articles taught me quite a bit. These are things that are in the game, just inaccessible during normal gameplay. Stuff like the many hidden NPCs throughout the game. There are several in areas that can't be accessed without the walkthrough walls cheat, most of which even have dialogue. There's one just named Guy in the bottom left corner of the prayer sanctuary, who says, "It used to that Tasmilly's villagers were the only people you saw around here, but these days visitors from far away have been growing in number, and those visitors are us, ha ha ha." Another one can be found in the sky next to the Empire Porky building, a policeman who says, "Master Porky referred to you as very dear and captivating guests." You're dear and captivating? You don't seem special to me. There's also this sign, which is located right below the twins' house on the cliff. This sign's text actually changes depending on which chapter you check it in. In Chapter 1, it says, "The contents of these boxes belong to everyone. Use them however you wish." In Chapter 2 it reads, "The contents of these boxes cost money. Please refrain from using them without paying." And in Chapter 4 and onwards it reads, "Be sure to talk to frogs once in a while." In the factory map near the highway, 2 pigmasks can be found who have no dialogue. They just vibin'. And lastly, a save frog lives in the walls of Club Titty-Boo who has no dialogue. Now onto some unused content. So let's start with some pre-release stuff. Want to make it clear that this will not be focusing on the content from the Nintendo 64 version of Mother 3, as that will be the focus of a future video, but we'll touch on a couple things real quick. Originally, Mother 3 had a couple different subtitles considered, and Fall of the Pig King was apparently being used as late in development of the GBA version as 2005 by Nintendo of Japan's Content Review Division. And according to some staff on the GBA version, the Nintendo 64 prototype of the game floated around the office around this time as well. There's a series of menus in the game data referred to as memos, which was re-implemented into the fan translation but goes unused in the Japanese version, which feels very weird to say. These memos for the most part offer some gameplay tips, background information, and even some other unused features, like the kindness stat, which, say it with me, we'll come back to later. To access this menu in the fan translation, simply hold L and R while entering the status screen, which again may be impossible for some depending on what the game is being played on. Some of these memos are set to be unlocked throughout the game and at certain events, which is what the Pigmask Colonel in the debug room is referring to when he mentions memo flags. Now, diving into even deeper unused content, there are some unused memos to talk about. Some detailing some sort of coupon exchange mechanic where enemies would drop coupons that could be exchanged through some process to get items, but was likely tossed out in favor of a more traditional money is deposited in bank after winning approach with the DP. Some other unused memos include some expounding on some story elements, some beans called magical creatures, one about Porky which explicitly mentions both Eagle Land and Onet, and one about PK Teleport which apparently was planned to be in the game. Several maps go unused as well, such as the area where you encounter the Masked Man in Chapter 8, most of this map going unused since the cutscene doesn't allow you to explore the area. The Pigmask airship goes largely unused since in the vanilla game it's unable to be seen in its entirety, but the airship is actually present in the air throughout the entire scene, even before the Pigmask army arrives, just sort of floating above. A couple of rooms in the maze of bathrooms go unused as there's no way to open either of these doors. One is a flooded bathroom while the other is filled to the brim with rolls of toilet paper. The flooded room also has an accompanying animation. This map, that is seemingly linked to the Tazmily Railroad, goes completely unused. It's not really known what this may have been intended for, but I speculate it may have had some connection to a needle at some point. This earlier version of the area with the twins' house has some interesting differences from the final, including an army of item guys, lacks the present on the cliff, a mailbox and lantern, and some other screwed up tiles. There's also this unused map of a bathroom that some have speculated would have been used somewhere in Club Titty-Boo. There are also several creepypasta-esque empty rooms with some interesting qualities. This one uses the track Blessing, Baldi's Recommend. This one has 2 empty presents and sports the cave theme, and the third and final one is completely empty and has no music. Pure bliss. There's an alternate evening palette for the area with Alex's house that can be accessed at the beginning of Chapter 2 with the walk through walls cheat, or through this wrong warp in Club Titty-Boo. Arriving through the latter method fills your inventory with a bunch of unused items. This map was possibly meant to be an alternate time of day for the prologue to take place, maybe to make it so the flow from evening to night in Chapter 1 was a bit smoother. A few graphics go technically unused as they're hidden by layers, such as the one on the naming screen, intro to Chapter 1, the courtyard of Oso Castle, and this Japanese character below the ocean during the opening cinematic, which reads, temporary. Mother 3 also has many items that go unused. An item called Favorite Food, whose name would have likely depended on player input, restores 300 HP and would have made it the best healing item in the game, along with the beefsteak. It registers as being worth 200 DP. A doorknob item, which is another case of something technically being in the game, just partially inaccessible. You finally get the doorknob during the ending, but can't view it due to the game not saving after the game is completed. If it's used in a battle, however, it will do 1 point of damage to an enemy. There's also the Memory Snake, which has no use but is suggestive of working similarly to the iconic Ruler item from Earthbound. The Suspicious Tea item deals 75 to 85 points of damage and can be bought for 20 DP. The Rotten Bavara is likely an early iteration of the Rotten Eclair, and is actually supposed to be available to get in the kitchen of Oso Castle via a trade, but due to a coding error requires the player to have a Rotten Eclair to even do it, so this trade can never be initiated. Finally, Test, whose description reads empty, is actually equipable, but makes the player vulnerable to every status ailment and PSI move, and adds 0 defense, which is hilarious and I wish it was in the final game. This was clearly meant for testing effects of attacks on players. Lastly, not an unused item, but the Courage badge is worth 1 DP when sold, but since it's a key item, the player can never even attempt this. Mother 3 has over 250 pieces of music in its soundtrack, so inevitably not all of it made the cut. I won't be covering every piece that went unused, but we'll be going over some of, in my opinion, the more notable ones. First is a noticeably sadder version of the piece, His Highness's theme. This was originally in place of the iconic Love theme, which wasn't even composed until a few months before the game's release, a toy believing the main theme should be simpler and could be played easily by young children, as Mother 1's 8 melodies was, and in some places still is, a common song for young children to learn in schools in Japan. Next, there is this awesome alternate version of the Love theme. I personally think this was meant to play at some point during the ending credits, but that's all speculation. There's a rendition of the Sanctuary boss theme from Earthbound. A track the Cutting Room Floor dubs the Eerie song is interesting. This track was for a long time by fans mistakenly thought to be a cut Gygas theme, but has since been found to be actually a slowed down version of DCMC's OJ Counting. The last one I'd like to touch on is this alternate theme for Tazmily Village, which was meant to play during flashback sequences that were cut from the final game. There were also a couple of cut party members. Bronson is a notable example, as he has a full running animation. He was probably meant to accompany Flint and Alec, even possibly instead of Alec, in the latter half of Chapter 1. Another one, surprisingly enough, is Hanawa. She's much less finished overall though, and her only battle option is to run. The kindness stat is a topic that's still not quite understood by anyone, though some have asserted some interesting theories. What we do know is that the stat was a carryover from Mother 64, and has a memo reading, "This is one of the most important things for us humans, so let's be kind to others. If your kindness stat goes up, something good is bound to happen." Something many don't know is that the kindness stat does actually have one impact on gameplay in the final game, though it's next to unnoticeable. The only thing it directly affects is the amount of HP Lucas heals with life up, but again, it's hardly noticeable, but with hacking becomes much more apparent. There's also the Consider Battle command, another holdover from the N64 version, even less is understood. But I guess this was likely akin to the Sing and Pray functions from the previous games. There are two unused status effects that in the game data are both labeled Monkey Dance IQ, with one seeming to be a way to raise the IQ stat and the other to decrease it. The effects use the same animations as the speed altering ones, and are likely linked with the unused purple variants. Many of the game's unused cutscenes take place in the Sunshine Forest during the fire in Chapter 1, and involve the twins and Hanawa for the most part. There are several unused flashback sequences with the twins. Some of these flashbacks appear in what's called the Unused Attract mode, which were just a series of small cutscenes that play on the title screen if left idle for a little while, much like the opening to Earthbound. While not necessarily cutscenes, several cameos from Flint later in the game were removed. There's a removed scene in the Chimera Lab where the party will be shown a movie that failed to play, and during the staff credits there are some images that go unused. Now, there are a ton of unused sprites in the game, so we're just going to cover the most interesting ones and save the rest for another time. Lucas has some unused running animations in his pajamas, as he's unable to do so until he changes into his clothes during the prologue, but can be seen simply by entering the debug room. Klaus has many sprites and animations that go unused, mostly from the previously mentioned cut twins flashbacks, but he also has several animations in the captain's uniform unmasked, perhaps suggesting there was more to the ending, or that he was intended to be unmasked earlier in the scene. And this odd sprite of a post-time skip Klaus not in uniform, just sitting. Flint has an insane amount of unused sprites and animations, most of which were intended for the forest fire sequence, but some seemingly recreating moments from scenes that were shown in the trailer for Earthbound 64, as well as specialty animations like dodging the train on the railroad tracks and hanging on to Duster during the end of Chapter 5. This is because Flint was originally intended to be part of the core party, but was replaced by Kumatora later in development. There's also many of him without his hat, again suggesting there was more to show during the ending than in the final game, including this one of him collapsed, which was likely meant for a scene during the final boss fight after he's hit with Klaus's PK Love. Duster has some interesting ones, including this one of him being electrocuted, a frame of which can be seen during the credits. I also like these ones of him sleeping, a cool diagonal facing action animation of him using rope snake, as well as some of him using a regular rope. He also has several sprites and animations in his DC MC costume and his second black wig. Kumatora has some kneeling sprites in her waitress outfit, and some animations in a completely alternate design, which was either an earlier one or some sort of alternate form of her. Finally, she has this animation of her with a magic motif unlike anything else in the game. Duster also has his own version of this same animation, and was likely how PK Teleport would have looked had it been implemented. Salsa has some sprites of him as just a little guy, and the same style as when the party exits Snowcap Mountain, possibly suggesting he was intended to rejoin the party for much longer than just the Chimera Lab segment at the Second Needle. While total speculation, I think this could possibly be why a primate is the boss of this area, to possibly contrast our beloved monkey. Fuel has some additional animations in his pitch black and covered in soot form, as well as this one of him blinking? Alec has this kneeling animation, which may have been intended for when he and Flynn find Klaus's shoe on Mount Oriander. Wes has many sprites based around sitting and sleeping, perhaps for if you attempted to visit him before he becomes more involved in the story during the search for the family. Hanawa has some animations that go unused as they were intended for the cut forest fire cutscenes, as well as of her ghost doing various things, including this very off-putting angry one. Really like this vanishing one though, very cool. And Lighter has some cool action animations. Bronson has several completed animations, including a full run cycle, him punching, and several other things, even some specialty sprites for him in his factory uniform. There are several animations for NPCs in some sort of brainwash state, which was probably intended for Newport City, as brainwashing is implied on more than one occasion. Jonal has some animations that were intended for the campfire scene, as he was originally the one intended to reveal Hanawa's death to Flint instead of Bronson. Mike has sprites in a factory worker's uniform, but lives at the old man's paradise in the final game, so they're never warranted. There's also these hilarious animations of Dr. Andonuts falling out of the void. These were meant as part of a layer for a sprite of him falling out of his trash can, as there's ones that perfectly align, probably meant for his introduction at the Chimera Lab. There's these great walk cycles for a generic old guy wearing Duster's brown DCMC wig, which may explain why he's given a black one at the DCMC concert at the Empire Porky building. Sprites of the item guy's card as a pitch tenor are also present, and was intended as where you'd find the game's healer, but was likely seen as unnecessary with the abundance of healing locations throughout. There's this amazing animation of the Dryer Chimera inflating that can be found, and some alternate character designs for Aeolia and Ferrigia. The Pigmask too has some cool unused stuff, like this one of one trying to pull something out of the ground, presumably a needle, and probably intended for comedic effect. There are quite a few affiliated with water, including this one of a periscope. I'm guessing these were intended to be seen around Cerulean Beach in order to direct the player to go into the water. Master Eddie has some animations you never see because they're triggered only if you approach him from the front. The Barrier Trio actually has a full walk cycle that can even be re-implemented into the game via hacking, as well as some other strange ones. The Masked Man has some additional attacking animations, as well as this one of him being in a ruined in repair state. These were likely meant to be some sort of detail in the Empire Porky building, being repaired after him and Lucas's previous encounter. Porky's unused animations all show an earlier design of him and his mech, including one of its glass shattering. Some show the mech floating, which is odd because the existence of the spider mech in Mother 3 dates all the way back to the Nintendo 64 version. The Porkybots also have some unused animations, as well as their own earlier design, which are actually much closer to match Porky's design in Earthbound, including this one of him sitting, which I think was intended to be used for some sort of spinning chair reveal. There's a happy end graphic, which might suggest multiple possible endings, which may have linked with the kindness stat. This dummy graphic, which is often used when an unfinished graphic is loaded into the game. I really like this one. It feels like something out of the Mario and Luigi series. Oh, by the way, I guess I never showed most of the game over screens, so here they are. But did you know that Kumatora actually has an unused one as well? Well, here it is. Yeah, this is another dummy graphic. A pretty amazing one though. There are some larger graphics for the Skyrunner, Runaway 5 Bus, Taxi, and Yellow Submarine from Earthbound, originally meant to be for the Hall of Memories, but they ultimately decided to just rip the original sprites from Mother 2 instead. An unused Buddha statue, which I think probably would have been used alongside these elephant statues outside of Club Titty-Boo. This amazing pigskin rug. The game also has an entire small kanji font, but goes unused because there's no way to input kanji. Mysteriously, there's a compressed image of the Ostrich Burger's historic Summit Inn cafe on Route 66, which may have been possibly used to test graphics in a more general sense. No idea, but it does continue the tradition of realistically stylized images being placed into the Mother games. Onto the unused battle sprites. Many mini-bosses and bosses have unused back sprites, including this incredible one of the Steel Mecharilla. Even the Masked Man has an alternate sprite in the form of him being unmasked but still in his fighting stance. There's this adorable unused bear enemy, which some have claimed has some connection to the honey shower item, which occasionally will say a bear came out instead of bees. But nothing ever shows up graphically anyway, so I'm a bit skeptical. An unused mini-boss called the Tiny Forest is also present, and its battle memory text indicates would have been fought at the end of the Mole Cricket hole, but was removed for unknown reasons, which is disappointing as this is some really cool pixel art. There's also this palette swap of the Navy Squeal, which looks pretty unfinished. A Drago was originally intended to be fought, and seems to be the one encased in ice at the Chimera Lab, even dropping the lab map after being defeated, which goes into your regular items instead of your key ones, but cannot be dropped. The Drago won't attack and attempts to confide its worries in you, which makes you cry. It has no battle sprite, but might be a remnant of the kindness and or consider mechanics. Using the walk through walls cheat, you can even fight Dragos during the prologue, so it seems to previously been a more involved aspect of the game. The brooms from Oso Castle also have battle data, but lack anything to do in battle. My theory is that they probably had some sort of planned move similar to Roar in Pokemon, which would spit you out of battle and send you back to the trash can before the section like in the final game. There's also an unused enemy called the Three Amigos, which worries me that you may have had to kill the Sanchez brothers originally, which I know the original story was dark, but damn toy. There are several battles with backgrounds similar to the Masked Man fight with alternate enemy names, including Duster, which makes me think possibly that it was intended that the Masked Man would utilize the Pigmask's army's brainwashing techniques to turn your party against you. OJ attacks too! Classic OJ. The most infamous unused battle, however, is the one fans have named the Gygus battle. Many are related to Klaus, but we don't actually know if any of this is the case. It's just a bunch of garbage data from an unrelated sector of data, which is why it has so many oddball names like Dung Beetle, Tent Person, Snow Bunny, Sign F1 and F2, Train. It's a mess. Many have incorrectly correlated these elements to the unused track that turned out to be slowed counting, even believing that it was really saying Ruka, Lucas's Japanese name. But there's actually no solid evidence Gygus was ever even part of this game's story, at any point. Some have even hacked these back into the game though, and it is a fun battle to watch, albeit pretty unsettling. This sea urchin enemy straight up uses the Sanctuary Guardian background from Earthbound. Possibly for testing purposes. There are also tons of unused battle backgrounds that all look pretty cool in their own right, but don't have much to offer in the way of interesting battles themselves. Some unused sprites, such as this Pigmask Zeppelin and an earlier design for another possible yellow Pigmask, correlate pretty directly with the game's concept art, and there's quite a bit more of it to see. Lucas and Klaus had quite a few different designs, one of the earliest for Lucas dating back to around 1996, back during development for the N64, with a much more expressive face, though quite different from his personality in the final game. On the art style change, Itoi said, "Each character has a completely different face now, so it's easy to recognize who it is when you see them." Mother 3's original art director, Benimaru Ito, said the team was inspired by art styles of films such as Toy Story. Lucas would continue changing shape frequently, Ito saying it seemed like his design was redone almost every day. This one of him sporting redder hair and a poncho is from late 1996, and this one of him now with his iconic blonde hair along with a fanny pack and Yeezys comes from mid-1997. Duster also had a pretty major redesign, but Flint stayed mostly consistent. Klaus seemingly was originally designed to look much more like Ness, as seen in this screenshot, but was also redesigned, looking much closer to Lucas's 1997 model. We also have this eerie screenshot of post-timeskip Klaus, which seems to imply that the timeskip was originally planned to be longer than 3 years, as well as this post-timeskip Lucas. Again, going to try not to spend too much time on the N64 version, as that can be its own separate video, just gonna look at a couple more of the main characters. Kumatora had her share of interesting designs throughout development, even in the GBA version, and Boney had this great bug-eyed one throughout most of the previous iteration. Salsa was originally pink, but interestingly enough, Facade seems to have stayed quite consistent throughout development. Mother 64 gave us a lot of interesting world concept art, much of it drawn by Ito, that shows us earlier iterations of several locations, as well as, to be expected, unused locations. We also have some early and unused character designs for enemies, some of which are in my opinion quite rad. I like this one, which I think was probably going to be some sort of infant version of the Flying Man. The GBA version's concept art is pretty cool too, also with some fun and early unused enemies, which were drawn by battle and event designer Akiyuki Suzuki, some being revealed as recently as this year. I really like this one of an unused chimera of a fish and a radish. Speaking of this year, yet another version of some of the main characters were discovered as recently as a couple months ago. These are the earliest screenshots of the GBA version known at the moment, and show early redesigns of the twins, Flint, Salsa, Samba, a Clayman, and some other NPCs. These were drawn by Mother 3 producer Shinichi Kameoka, and according to him were intended to subvert player expectations, and very much resemble the Mana series, which makes sense as Kameoka was both a producer and character designer for many of them. These designs date back to around 2002, and I actually quite like them. Don't get me wrong, I prefer the late N64 and final GBA redesigns, but for a one-off reinterpretation, I think they're pretty cool and radical. For the GBA version, Ito was replaced as art director by Nobuhiro Imagawa, who also drew much of the concept art, also quite radical, with a much heavier pig and sci-fi aesthetic to the Pigmask Army's machinery. His interpretations of some of the characters are also pretty cool, and I quite like this one of Ionia, which has this cool, almost Kokiri forest motif. I also really like this concept image of New Pork City, it's lots of fun. One other thing about the GBA version is Nintendo attempted to patent the game's sound battle system, filing for one in 2003. The last piece of unused concept material I'd like to mention is a species that would have been known as the Yotore-san. This little guy was revealed in 2020 by Toshinao Aoki, most known for his illustration work for the Pokemon trading card game, who designed them for the N64 version of the game and were seemingly hinted at all the way back in mid-1997 by Ito, who said the Mr. Saturns wouldn't be the only friendly species in the game. According to Cody Nokolo from MotherForever.net, their name is a reference to the Japanese verb for dancing, possibly indicating that they were in some way related to the Oso dance, and likely would have been the teachers of it. There's even new Mother 3 art being posted now. Imagawa has posted some original art he's done since its release, and posts original traditional and pixel art on the game's anniversary annually. Also, remember those cool clay models Mother 1 and 2 had made for development and promotional material? Well, Mother 3 doesn't have any, sadly. These clay models aren't actually official, and were made by artist Flynn of Mother 3, and have been used in fan materials such as the Mother 3 handbook by Fangamer. But what if I told you there actually are some official Mother 3 clay models in existence? While not made for development, Imagawa, the absolute madman, actually has gone as far as making his own clay models, posting them on Twitter occasionally, including these ones of a Clayman, some Mr. Saturns, the car-driving Save Frog, Rope Snake, Lucas, and Boney. Some are pretty rough around the edges, but regardless are welcome additions to the family. In terms of official artwork, Mother 3 doesn't have a ton. Mother 3i and Mother 3 Plus, two official soundtracks released digitally and physically in Japan, but only digitally in the US, feature some nice pixel art. The game's actual release, if you can believe it, seemed to be pretty hectic, actual information about it being revealed pretty close to release. In the last months of development, Atoy ran a daily blog where he revealed new information about the game, posting music, characters, screenshots taken with debug mode, likely to prevent spoiling the game's party, and some art. These including a map of the Nowhere Islands, the game's logo, and that's pretty much it. Though some official phone and desktop wallpapers were also released, the latter even being designed by Atoy himself. Finally, on April 18th, 2008, 2 days before the game's release, Atoy posted the following letter to fans. Mother 3 is a playground with plenty of room for your imagination to run free. The more you think about it, the greater Mother 3 will become. The more you feel it, the deeper it will become. The more fun you have, the more you'll grow. Lastly, Atoy did an extended interview throughout the first week of the game's release. Can't cover it now, but I might make a video or series of videos on this at some point. There's some really cool stuff in it, so if you're interested, it's worth checking out. And now for some last minute other stuff I'd like to mention. When the game was re-released for the Wii U Virtual Console in 2016, the game saw a couple of minor revisional differences. The lightning that strikes Lucas on Thunder Tower was recolored yellow, along with the flashing lights in the scene being toned down. This also being done for the Porky scene in Chapter 8. The background for the top dogfish's fight is also slightly brighter. I don't know why they saw this as vital to change, but any extra attention drawn to the top dogfish is a win in my book. Not in Mother 3, but for some reason in Pokemon X, Tandagasa is marked as an inappropriate custom greeting, though the words separately are fine. It's unknown why, but it's likely that Nintendo is punishing you for pirating the game. Also not in Mother 3, the game is referenced in the manga Black Butler. Don't want to focus too much on fan projects, but I'd like to draw attention to a couple. The first is the Mother 3 fan translation rewritten, a translation done by a fan independently from the more widely used one that focuses on giving individual characters more personality in their dialogue, especially Kumatora. I haven't played this version, but I've heard it's worth checking out, even getting a shout out from Tomato. And even less known, this absolute mad lad made a simple Mother 3 engine on a calculator. Last one to mention is the Mother 3 HQ sound mixing patch that was recently released on Mother Forever. I don't know nearly enough about sound mixing to explain what this does, so I'd just recommend checking out for yourself if that sounds interesting to you. Though quite scarce and even more expensive, there is some official Mother 3 merchandise. Believe it or not, the most recent Mother 3 merchandise was released this year, with the Hobonichi Mother Project releasing these Clayman and Dog-like Dude plushies, which immediately sold out.
Better luck next year!
This sweet Mother 3 themed Game Boy Advance Micro Deluxe box set was released with the game and is one of the most sought after pieces of Mother 3 merch. These mini Mr. Saturn plushies were also released around the time of the game's release and were common in arcade machines in Japan. As mentioned before, the Mother 3 handbook by Fangamer is also great and is much like the Earthbound Player's Guide in quality and detail. The only official piece of Mother 3 merchandise released outside of Japan is the Lucas amiibo for Super Smash Bros. For Wii U and 3DS. And that concludes my Mother 3 playthrough series, and a list of overdue videos. Again, this isn't even close to comprehensive, as a ton more is out there and still being discovered regularly. For more information on Mother 3 and the rest of the series, I recommend checking out Earthbound Central and the newer and more frequently updated Mother Forever, as well as, again, the Cutting Room Floor. For more information on development and cut content from many games. Thanks to everyone who helped me with this video and helped me bring the end to an era, so to speak, for this channel. And thank you all so much for watching. If you want to get involved with our community, I'd suggest joining my Discord server that's linked in the description and keeping up with my future videos here on YouTube and updates on my Twitter. Bye!